Welcome to In Conversations hosted by Azim Premji University. We have with us today a very distinguished guest, Ambassador Sarna, diplomat, author, and columnist. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1980 and served as an Indian diplomat for the next 38 years. His diplomatic journey included assignments in places as diverse as Russia, Tehran, Thimphu, the UK, and the United States. He held several critical appointments, including as the Foreign Office spokesman, India's ambassador to Israel, High Commissioner to the UK, and Secretary to the Government of India. He holds the distinction of being the longest serving spokesperson of the ministry. He retired from diplomatic service in 2018 as India's ambassador to the United States. Pursuing a parallel passion as a writer, Ambassador Sarna has written 10 books that explore different genres: novels, short stories, travel, literary essays, and translations. He has been a prolific columnist and a commentator on policy, literary, and cultural matters, contributing regularly to journals in India and abroad. Welcome and thank you for making time. And it's an incredible privilege to have you with us today. We are very aware of your distinguished diplomatic career. However, your story goes beyond diplomacy. Your upbringing, steeped in a rich literary heritage with a Sahitya Academy awardee father and a mother who was also a translator, likely instilled a love for language in your early years. Interestingly, your professional journey began not in diplomacy, but as a journalist with the Hindustan Times evening news. These diverse experiences undoubtedly shaped you in profound ways. Can you share how your upbringing and early career influenced your writing?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be able to talk to you and to your audience. You are absolutely right. I think writing was my first vocation, if I can call it, perhaps not a career. But I started writing before I became a diplomat. And much of it had to do with the fact that, I was interested because my parents were both deeply steeped in literary work. It was only natural because grew up in a home which was full of books.
Right.
And my father was a writer. He was a short story writer, novelist, poet. My mother's poetess, a short story writer herself, as well as a Sahitya Academy Award winner for translation. She's done major classics from Punjabi to English,
Right.
from English to Punjabi rather. So naturally, when we were growing up, there was a lot of talk about books and writers and literature. And so one was given to that kind of tendencies.
Right.
So I did start, you rightly said that I did start writing when I was at university. I started writing features for Hindustan Times, etc. And, there used to be, in those days, there used to be this thing called the middle.
Right.
It's vanished from today's newspapers.
Right.
But Times of India and Hindustan Times, in particular, used to have a middle, which was a kind of a humor piece. I started doing a bit of those. And then I became the university correspondent for the evening news. The evening news used to be quite an institution in the pre-television days. So anybody who needed to know what had happened during the day went to Connaught Place in Delhi and picked up a 10 paisa evening news. And I used to be on page 3 twice a week, a different kind of page 3. So that sort of started me off on my writing journey. So that was early, but then it instilled in me the beginnings of the craft. I was not one of those writers who suddenly lands up and writes this prize-winning novel. I really learned how to write from the very basics, writing 300 words to make a sensible piece, then writing 800 words, then moving from that to a book review, moving from that to a short story. So I actually learned my craft bit by bit. I even did a course in journalism when I was a law student. So in the evenings, I used to do a course. There used to be a great venerable institution called the Dateline School of Journalism, which a lot of people would do that course and then join the magazine called JS,
Right.
which used to be a famous magazine those days for the young generation. So I did that course, and so on and so forth.
I think that's, you rightly said how you, I think, pretty much learned on the job, so to speak. And the advice that we give budding writers today, which, in writing courses and workshops and so on, we begin with the 300 words. We begin small and then we aspire to write more. And when you look at it from your very many years of writing, what might you want to say to young people who want to get on this path? Many want to be journalists, and very encouragingly, many of our students want to be journalists in their mother tongue, which is also very encouraging. So they want to do that. They also want to be very good writers and speakers of English. So would you have advice for them?
Well, I think, it depends on what the person wants to be, what sort of a journalist he wants to be, he or she wants to be. I think they should really they have to pick up role models. They have to pick up the kind of writing that you want to do. And then you have to read that much. You have to read that kind of writing. And then you have to begin to analyze the craft.
Right.
Like, what did this person do in this piece? And very often, we used to do it. I mean, I used to do it when you're reading a book. I used to sort of take a pencil and write at the back of the book, at the blank page, the last page. Okay, chapter 1, he or she does this. Then this character is introduced. Then there's a break here. Then there's a time sequence change here. So you actually analyze a book. Similarly, you actually can analyze an article.
Right.
Like, this is an 800-page op-ed. Now, what has this person done? In the first 2 paragraphs, he said what this is all about today. Then he's taken 3 paragraphs to say what has happened in the last 1 year. Then he's talking of 3 options which can happen in the future. So this way, the person can analyze what the person has written. So nobody, really, I think students have to understand that the only way out is to keep on trying. You have to write to realize that you can write or you can't write. You have to write to see that are you a good writer or not a good writer, or how can you get better. And how you can get better is by seeing somebody who is better, seeing somebody who has spent more years in the game. That's all. It's not that somebody is born as a genius or the other. 90% of everything is craft. I think the rest of the thing is, your talent, your inclination, your genius, or whatever it is. But there is a lot that can be learned. And I think that's the only way out.
I think that's a masterclass in itself, how you've broken down how one might look at a piece of writing. And I think that's excellent advice for anybody who wants to be a writer. The next question I have is, all of this, to me at least, writing brings a lot of clarity of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Did this help in your diplomatic career?
Yes, I think, what I found is that writing and diplomacy are not contradictory. They are complementary.
Right.
So they are two arts, should we say, or 2 vocations, or 2 professions, if you like, which actually complement each other. If you approach them with that kind of a feeling. And ultimately, because writing, all diplomats are writers. I mean, they may not be creative writers, they may not be poets and novelists, but writing is the bread and butter of diplomacy. Because what is writing? Writing is the use of language.
Right.
And what is diplomacy? Diplomacy, half the time you're just finding the right word. How are you going to phrase this so that I can give you a message without making you an enemy? Right. Or that you are my enemy, but I can say things to you which open the door of you becoming my friend. So the right kind of word, the right kind of usage. Now, for instance, do you say that this development, I condemn it, or I strongly condemn it, or I'm very disappointed with it, or I'm anguished with it? Each of these will convey a different message, a graded message. And diplomacy is all about nuance.
Right.
And a writer can bring the nuance better than somebody who doesn't understand the language. There are diplomats who are not creative writers, but they are writers nevertheless. because you're writing press releases, you're writing joint statements, you're writing speeches, you're writing telegrams back to headquarters. So writing is really is your face, not only to the outer world, but also to your own colleagues and friends back at headquarters. So I think it certainly, you cannot be a good diplomat if you are not able to logically understand a thing, to present a thing properly, to analyze a development. If you can't do that, then you can't really be a good diplomat. So I think they sort of buttress each other, and that's something which I found to my great advantage.
And I think you are in a unique position in that sense, because you are a writer and you're also a creative writer. And you've done a variety of different kinds of writing. And what is that process? How do it's almost as if one has to compartmentalize. You switch gears. Is that how the writing process works?
Well, in many ways, yes, while I did say that it is complementary, I think it is inhabiting two worlds at the same time. So it's just how badly you want to do it. It's not easy.
Right.
Because it does eat a lot into your, if you were only a diplomat who didn't worry about, oh God, this novel of mine is going nowhere, or, I'm wasting my time on Saturday and Sunday, I need to be working on my new book, or I have to, I saw this thing, this makes a short story. There's a constant kind of torment. It's not easy. And it's only if you really want to do it badly enough that you actually, some people think that, you become a writer because you didn't have enough work in diplomacy. That's the unkindest way of interpretation of this. I can tell you that we're not like that, because, you also have a sense of pride of being a good diplomat. So you don't want to be the kind of guy who hides in a quiet posting and wants to write his book. Some people might do that. I'm not saying so, but most of people have a more alert conscience.
Right.
So they are all that I'm getting money for being a diplomat. This is my duty to the country, and I have to do a good job. And at the same time, you have to have a very strong passion to be doing something else. If suppose you're a musician, you're not going to stop being a musician just because you became a diplomat.
Right.
Suppose you're a photographer, you're not going to stop. You're going to take advantage that, okay, I'm a photographer and I'm a diplomat. This gives me an opportunity to see certain places which I would not otherwise be doing. So let me improve my photography. The same, as I said, if you approach the two, there are two kind of deities that you have in front of you, and you have to approach them with the appropriate and equal devotion. Otherwise, one of them gets angry.
Right. And it's incredible that you say that, you have to want it really badly. But your career, without a doubt, has been quite busy in that sense. So it's very easy also to give it up, because, the justification is that
I'm too busy.
Yeah. Right? But you held on to it, and
yes, I think, yes, there are times when the frustration levels build up where you're too busy and you feel that I'm blocked, I can't write, and then you can see, and then you know that the only way forward is carry on. And that's so again, as I said, it just depends upon how strong your impulse is. A lot of people wait to retire to start writing.
Right.
And that's fine. People say no, and it also depends on the kind of writing you do. If you're going to write about international relations, you're going to write about foreign policy, then you can't really write while you're in service.
Right.
You're not free. So then you wait a couple of years more so that nobody will say anything to you, and then you write a book on, my days in China under Mao or something, But if you're a poet, if you're a novelist, if you're a short story writer, you're a cultural writer, a literary writer, you can actually keep writing right through. But you're right, very often Uh, I mean, it just depends upon how strong your impulse is. That's why you have gaps. You know, some years you can't do anything at all because you're just too busy. You're literally too busy. You're too tired, and you can't think. And then some days you find a green patch where you can actually carry on.
Carry on. I'm going to get closer to some of your books now, and before that, perhaps leading into that is your interest in history, and a significant amount of research goes into how you present your stories. What is the role of research when you're trying to represent history as well in stories?
Well, I've done 2 or 3 books which are history based, and I think they are entirely research based. Plus, but they are presented as fiction.
Right.
So at least 2 of my novels, The Exile and then The Crimson Spring, have both been formatted as historical novels. So my approach to this is that is fairly old-fashioned. You know, I don't want to change anything that's in history, that's recorded history. So I try. There are writers who take a historical figure and give it him or her an entirely fictional life. You know, Queen so and so, King so and they invent a life of a known historical figure. That's a choice which they make. I like to take a historical figure, a historical event, and then see what is missing. You know, which dimensions are missing in this? Because you know, I feel a certain responsibility if I write Crimson Spring, which is a historical novel based on Jallianwala Bagh episode and what was happening around it. Some kid might only read that book and say this is the history of Jallianwala Bagh, and I don't want that student or that young person to be misled on the historical parts. So what I add is the fiction part, which doesn't disturb the details of history, but which is, for instance, it may be the emotional aspects of certain characters, or it may be fictional characters based against a historical event. So the historical facts are taken as correct. No dates are changed, no places are changed, no names of historical characters are changed. But then, you know, against a historical background, you also have ordinary people.
Right.
So there are their stories. So it's truly, I think that is my way of looking at historical fiction. That you don't change the history, but you make it more interesting by talking of the lives of ordinary people or talking of the internal lives of historical figures which may not have been recorded by history.
Right.
You know, so you can get it from there. For instance, in The Exile, it's about Maharaja Dalip Singh, who was the last king of Punjab, and he was exiled to Britain, and he had a very sad, tragic life. Now, very little was written about him before this book. I mean, it was written, but it was in pure, cold historical terms. Basically, as a footnote of history, he had been left. So, but then when I read his letters, I read his own version, then you could see inside his mind.
Right.
And from there, I created his psychological and emotional life, you know, without changing the details like when did he go, who did he marry, how many children he had, all that is given as correct.
Right.
But then what he thought, what he felt had to be filled in.
You know, and I think a lot of times growing up, our history is relegated really to textbooks. And it's interesting to understand it from a different perspective. And I think we are getting into that sort of storytelling now where we have more access to history from the point of view of the ordinary person that lived through that history.
Yes, the subaltern view of history.
Right.
And that gives you a completely, you know, a bottoms-up approach. I mean, not just straight from the palaces, but you really see what was happening on the streets.
So one of your, I think, books is a work of translation. And Zafarnama. And first, I'd like to understand if the translation happened from Persian to English, or was it from Persian to Punjabi first and then to English, and what that process was like for you.
Yes, actually, I've done two translations. The Zafarnama was a very difficult translation. It is almost a sacred text. It is a letter written by the 10th Sikh Guru to Aurangzeb.
Right.
And it was written in 111 verses in Persian.
That's right.
I was very fortunate that I had done a stint in Iran. And I did pick up some amount of Persian, which is very, very rusty. But at least when I started working on that book, I could figure out where things were really going wrong, because it has been translated many times into Punjabi or Gurmukhi, sometimes in verse, sometimes in blank verse. Right. Indifferently in different places. Some are good translations, and there are differences in the way it's been translated. And all that I've explained in the introduction. I wanted to do it into English. There are translations in English, but not really good translations in verse. There are one or two good translations done abroad by scholars, which are again in blank verse. So I wanted to do it into English. I used the existing translations, both in English and as well as the Gurmukhi translations, and did my own translation. With my basic knowledge of Farsi, plus the existing translations, plus my test was that I wanted it in verse.
Right.
And, it was a very humbling experience that I actually managed to do it over a period of 2 years.
And it's very beautifully laid out as well.
It was very nicely produced by Penguin, and they did a great editing and a great production job, and we worked a lot on the art form and, what would accompany it. And I must say that it's now 10, 11 years, and it has become, a standard translation of the Zafarnama.
Right. And confusion and frustration are familiar friends when you set out on the path of translation. Did you meet these friends?
Oh, yes, all the time, all the time. There would be days and days when you just couldn't get the right verse, know. And there would be some days when you got 3 verses, So you have to do that. There was confusion because, there are so many different texts.
Right.
And so you had to decide which one you were going to pick up. There were so many different... So I tried to just solve it by adding footnotes.
Right.
And explaining that, listen, I'm not a great scholar of this. I'm trying to translate it here. But this is one version, this is another version. Possibly it is this, possibly it is this. So I, kept my hands clean by putting the footnotes. But that's again a way of,
And I think several people who've read your translation say that it was done very well, and perhaps one of the finest versions of the text itself. So I'll move closer to the next book, and this is about Maharaja Dalip Singh. Mm-hmm. What fascinates you about him?
He is actually a very intriguing figure in Sikh history. And firstly, it was that, he had a very tragic life. And that was what was fascinating. B, there was very little known about so many aspects of his life. We heard as children that there was this handsome young boy. He used to wear the Kohinoor. He was the king of Lahore. And then when Punjab was annexed, they took him away. They changed his religion. He was converted to Christianity and all that. So it was a very intriguing life. And then he dies this lonely death in Paris, and he's buried in England. And I had visited his grave. So it was a whole story was very, very intriguing. I wanted to actually go into the details to find out what actually happened at every stage. How did this tremendously huge and powerful kingdom of Maharaja Ranjit Singh fall? It was the largest kingdom in Hindustan. It stretched from the borders of Afghanistan down to the Sutlej River. And even the British did not dare to cross the Sutlej into his territory. They made a peace treaty and left it at that. And when he dies, within 10 years, the kingdom is annexed. It breaks up. It is full of internal struggles. There are internecine rivalries. There are fights. There's intrigue. And within 10 years, from 1839 to 1849, the kingdom vanishes. And all the riches of Punjab, all the diamonds and the peacock throne, and not the peacock throne, the Kohinoor diamond, and the huge amounts of wealth of Ranjit Singh, and many, many precious items just vanish. They're taken away. And this boy who's sitting on the throne is deceived. He's separated from his mother. Then he is very converted very gently, to the point that he says, no, I want to convert. So he's converted to Christianity, and then of course he converts back into Sikhism later when he realizes what actually happened to him. So the whole thing was very intriguing, and he goes, then he sets himself up as an English squire. He's hunting foxes, and he's shooting pheasants and all that. And then he begins to realize what destiny had done to him. Then he rebels, and how his rebellion fails. So it was a fascinating story. So I spent many years researching him, going to each place that he lived. I went to Lahore many times, to the fort. I went to each of his residences in Paris. I went to his estate in England and saw where he lived, and how he lived. And then I put together that book. So he's a fascinating character. He's a tragic hero in that sense.
Right, that sense, right. So I'll change track here and perhaps begin the conversation around your diplomatic career.
Mm-hmm.
Very simply, what is it like to be an ambassador?
I think it's a very honored sort of position to be in. Yeah, and I think one should accept it with all humility, that it is truly an honor to be able to speak for India. So when you speak as an ambassador, not even as ambassador, even as a young diplomat, if you're speaking somewhere, you are speaking not for a company, you're not speaking for even a business empire, you are speaking for the entire country. And everything that you say has to be seen in that way. So again, it depends upon what you see it as. If you see it as this great piece of pride that's been given to you and you respect it, it's a tremendous profession. And I think it's a very challenging thing. I mean, people have this common sort of vision of diplomats and ambassadors as living in very fancy places, swimming around, having cocktails, going from one party to the other, and all that. A bit of that is always there. It is a very glamorous profession. I'm not saying that. It is a very glamorous profession. But as somebody said, we know about diplomacy is supposed to be protocol, vitriol, and alcohol. But you forget the sweat. Right. There's also the sweat, because you're not always sitting in London or Paris or Washington. You may be sitting in the most remote place. You may be sitting where there's no medical help. You may be sitting where there is shooting on the streets. I have lived through the Soviet Union days as a deprived young diplomat. You didn't know where you were going to get dinner the next day if you were not clever enough to stock your house properly and make sure that you had enough food and bread, etc. This was the early 80s. We've lived through the post Chernobyl experience,
Right.
and how, you know, how an radioactive cloud is going over you, and then you begin to suffer the effects or possible effects 20 years later. So, you know, and then you've been through abductions, you've been through evacuations, you've been through all sorts of things, and then there is the daily routine of running an embassy.
Right.
As an ambassador, if you're ambassador in the United States, you have an embassy of 200 people to run. You have different, very senior officers to work with on your own side. You have a huge relationship to handle where anything and everything can go wrong, where almost every day there is some crisis happening in some part of your work. And, you know, as I said, so the profession combines adventure, glamour, uh, a lot of hard work. You know, one of my earliest ambassadors used to define uh, being a diplomat. He said it's like a swan, very calm on the surface, but paddling furiously underneath. You know, so that is it. I can't really give you a better example than that.
Right. So now, you know, this position affords you the perspective of really very different cultures. Um, can you share some experiences, you know, from your posting in Russia, Tehran, the US? Because protocols, I'm assuming, would be different. And
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, again, you can't, I mean, you can't be that I am this diplomat and no matter where I'm go, that's what I'm going to be. You have to change. What is primary is how quickly you can adjust to. There's some basic diplomatic protocols which are governed by the Vienna Conventions of on diplomacy. You get immunities, there are courtesies, and all that. But you have to adjust to a different environment every time you shift positions. For instance, you are absolutely right. I lived in the Soviet Union, which was a communist society, and you had to work under those conditions. It was a totalitarian society. You could go to certain places, you could not go to certain places. We went to Poland, and Poland was still under communism those days. So even as diplomats, you had a ration card. You could only get this many kilos of meat, this much butter, this much oil, this much sugar. Even for diplomat, there were shortages. So you had to go to a particular shop every month and take your ration.
right.
Basically, you know, you had a ration card in that sense. And somebody would think that, you know, he's a diplomat, you know, he must be getting everything. No. And then, so you had to live under those, and you have to observe local rules. You have to observe local customs. Iran, you mentioned. Yes, you have to observe local customs. When my wife went there, she was expected to wear the hijab. I mean, it was a headscarf and a sort of coat.
Right.
They used to allow you to wear long robes and a scarf. But then, you know, she wore it, and then she could mingle into the local society, and she could. But you can't say that I will not wear it. I'm a diplomat. No, you can't. Then you are not respecting a local custom. And similarly, you know, in Bhutan, for instance, again, when I was there, a very, it was a pure monarchy. Then they became, you know, monarchy plus there's a democracy there now. But that time it was a monarchy. You observed certain things when there was a royal car passing. You know, you observed, you slowed down, you did not show disrespect, did not do various things. And there were certain ways of expressing they respected you and you respected their system.
Right.
You know, so similarly in each country, there are cultural mores, there are social mores, which you learn and you observe, and you fit into it.
Right.
You know, while keeping your diplomatic privileges and immunities.
You've spent a significant amount of time in Israel. How challenging was that?
Well, looking back now and given what's been happening, I think it was a very, very good time in Israel. I stayed there for 4 years, and there was the first Gaza war of 2008 briefly, but it didn't impact us so much in Tel Aviv. Uh, it, it, it was a very exciting place to be in. It is a very important crossroads. It's a crossroads, if you see it in not just in purely immediate political terms, it's a crossroads of history. It's where, it's Jerusalem is sacred to Christianity, to Islam, and to Judaism. It's the crossroads of languages, and it's very, very complex society. Not only do you have the complexities of Palestinian and Israel conflict, you have the complexities of the Jewish society within itself.
Right.
It's a very, very deeply stratified society. Everybody's come from a different background, everybody's come from a different country, and there are differences of practice, etc. Again, another country where you really have to observe what's happening, and you have to observe the social norms. On Shabbat, that is Saturday, nothing ever happens. Nobody phones you, and you're not really expected to be ringing up people. So, it's a complete day of rest. You can go to a house where the lift won't work.
Right.
Unless they have a Shabbat lift which stops at every floor. And then you get used to that. So, again, you have, and then you have, the Yom Kippur holidays, and then you have long Jewish holidays where prayers are done and people live in a particular way and eat a particular kind of food or don't eat a particular kind. For instance, Passover, they do not eat leavened bread.
Right.
So the houses are cleaned and there should not be even a speck of bread left in the house. So, then you observe all this. You don't observe it in your house if you're not a believer in that sense, but you respect it.
Right.
So I think it was a very exciting time, very important country for India, very important relationship, and a very complex set of circumstances that surrounds it in the Middle East. So both personally and professionally, it was a very challenging but very rewarding posting.
Right. Again, the other interesting aspect of your professional career was that you served as the Indian ambassador during the Trump administration. Could you share some of?
Well, yes, I think I reached the United States perhaps 72 hours before Mr. Trump was elected. And nobody really expected him to be elected. I dare say that even he himself did not expect himself to be elected. They had not made any preparations of transition, of taking over the White House, or putting their own people in different. So it was suddenly a very exciting time because these were not the normal Republicans who were coming back. This was the Trump Republicans, which were a different lot than the normal Republicans, who would be known and predictable and all that sort of thing. So it was a very exciting time. And the early Trump administration worked in very different ways. There were frequent changes of appointments. By the time you got to know somebody, they were changed. And there were, for instance, the State Department, with which we normally work with as diplomats, was not manned at the higher levels for months. So you didn't have really your counterparts. So it was, and there were new people in town coming who said who had, knew Mr. Trump or said they knew Mr. Trump and his family and others. So it was a bit of the Wild West, and you had to really find new ways of reaching the White House, find new ways of access, because you had to go and tell the India story to people. You had to go and underline how important this relationship is. You had to make your enough contacts so that when your foreign secretary or your foreign minister or your prime minister came to town, you would actually have a proper visit. You would actually have appointments. You would actually have meaningful meetings. So the first 6 or 8 months was very, very hard work. And then we got our game together. We found our pathways into the American administration, into the Trump administration. And then I must say that it was a I would regard it as a fairly successful time for the India-US relations, particularly in strategic, in security, in defense relations. We made a lot of progress. There were some problems on the trade side, etc., because Mr. Trump has his own view of trade, and we might face those again if he comes back again. But on the security, broader strategic issues, I think there were very significant steps that we took in those 2 years. So it was, in retrospect, I think it was a very exciting experience. It was unpredictable because, he has a way of jangling the news cycle every morning,
Right.
and you didn't know what you were going to expect during the day. But ultimately, I think the India-US relationship has been consistently growing, and it continued to grow well in those 2 years.
Right. From everything that you've been telling me, in the course of our conversation about diplomacy and foreign relations and so on, without a doubt, one has to have a very distinct kind of mental makeup. So if somebody were to be thinking about the Indian Foreign Service, what might you want to say to young people about that makeup?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you must want to do it.
Right.
And you must want to do it for the right reasons. You must not want to do it, again, today it's not a great attraction that I will go abroad. In our time, that was a big attraction. But today, this is not a big. Everybody goes abroad for holidays and things have become accessible. So do it for the right reasons. And I think the right reasons are that the sheer intellectual involvement that it demands,
Right.
the sheer sense of engagement and adjustment. Are you curious enough about the world? Or are you self-satisfied? Are you saying that I know everything, we know everything, my country, my society, my region knows everything, I really don't have very much to learn? Then I don't think you're going to make a diplomat. You must go with an absolutely open mind, because every society will have a plus and a minus. Every country will have a plus and minus. If you're going to focus on the minuses,
Right.
then you're not going to be able to feed the relationship. So I think you have to go with what is called the intellectual energy into this engagement. You have to go with an open mind. You have to go with a sense of adventure. You have to go with a love for the unpredictable. So I think these are, and you have to be open-minded to say, yes, I want to learn about that culture.
Right.
I want to learn that language. I want to be able to spend time reading about that place. So it is, it is fundamentally an intellectual profession.
We have two campuses. The Azim Premji University has two campuses. One is in Bangalore, the other is in Bhopal. And several of our students are actually interested in a career in the civil services. Many of them, of course, understand what it takes to perhaps, crack the exam, and maybe even to the extent of succeeding in the interview. But for long-term success, what should one be thinking about?
Exactly what I said. Because cracking the exam and the interview is the first step. Then begins the hard part.
Right.
Then you don't know where you're going to be posted. Then you don't know, what you're going to be expecting in that situation. What are the troubles and tribulations that might come in your way along with the goodies. So I think that is when the person has to really begin the climb of learning. Does that person want to specialize? Say, does he do Chinese as a language? If he gets Chinese as a language, then how much does he want to study on China? How much investment does he want to do? Or he just wants to finish the language and then move towards New York? Does he want to go into multilateral work or bilateral work? Does he want to do a mix of both? There are people who try to follow different tracks. There are some of us, like I never tried to follow a particular track. I learned Russian as my first language, and I was never posted to Russia for the next 38 years. But that's the way sometimes happens, and no regrets because you did so many other different things. So I think you have to define your career then. Some of it is in your hand, some of it is destiny, some of it is what is given to you.
Right.
And then you have to find your strengths. Are you a good political officer? Are you a good economic officer? Are you a good trade negotiator? Are you a good press officer? Or do you actually like consular work, because consular work has become very important? Or do you, but I think a well rounded diplomat has a bit of everything.
Right.
And that's where what becomes important, especially when you're posted in a small mission. So that is why we always say that your second posting after your language posting should be to a small mission, where you go to a small mission where there's just the ambassador and you and some support staff. But the ambassador and you, and the ambassador is not going to get his hands dirty all the time. He has other things to do, has more representational duties to perform. And you, as that young officer, as a second secretary, will have to do administration, will have to do visas, will have to do political reporting, will have to meet the occasional journalist, will have to organize the dance performance at the ambassador's residence. So you have to have a bit of that, and that is what makes you. Because if you've done 3 years of that, then when you later become ambassador, you know what is going on.
Right.
Otherwise, you will, unless you have got your. So I would tell the young diplomat, presuming that they have got selected, that go in with an open mind, go in for the tough postings, learn the craft of diplomacy, and then it only gets easier.
Right. When we think about the interview, when a lot of candidates come into that phase, why is that many of them don't make the cut?
I don't know. I mean, I think everybody faces different kind of interview boards and experiences. But I think ultimately, what counts in as an interview is how you have developed till then, how much you have read, how much you have thought about things, how much you have tried to get your own ideas in order, how much can you speak well.
Right.
Can you quickly organize your thoughts and present a reasonable answer? Can you be honest? Can you be honest and say, I'm sorry, I don't know this aspect, but however, this aspect is, and so I think in interviews, there's a lot of luck involved. And there are nowadays, I mean, unlike our times, there were no coaching, there was nothing. But nowadays, of course, you find a lot of people who are doing these classes, and I think there's something to learn from them.
Right. Have you been on interview panels yourself?
On the UPSC? Mm-hmm. No, I've not been able to do it. I was invited to send in my name to be on the panel, but given everything else, I wasn't able to do so.
I was just reading up on a few things, and the 2023 IFS, I think 37 candidates were shortlisted. Mm-hmm. Is it more difficult to enter the IFS now, or is the interest sort of waning? Or is there some other matter because of which there aren't as many people? No,
it's actually increased, the number of people. In our time, there were 20 people. In some years before us, there used to be only about 10 or 12 people. So when we thought we were 20, which was seen as a large batch, then we have found that we are a very short-handed foreign service.
Right.
For a country with our commitments, with our number of embassies and consulates, we need a much bigger foreign service. Equivalent countries, say like Brazil, in terms of size, in terms of profile, etc., have many times the number of diplomats than we have. So I think it was decided about 15 years ago that we would begin the process of expanding the foreign service. And gradually we have been advancing. So when you say 37, it's a very large batch. So I think there was a dip in interest levels a few years ago, but I think now that we have recovered that. And I think now a lot of people who really want to do this are coming in.
One of the, undeniable and something that's very obvious, is that your impeccable ability to communicate. And this is perhaps required for the job as well. So for young people who are, aspiring to get into the services, how early should they be thinking about this?
Well, I think they should be doing this right from school. I would recommend, public speaking, debates. They have different kinds of debates than they used to have. Elocutions, getting onto radios and television, youth programs. I think all of this is essential requirement today, and not only for diplomacy, in so many other professions.
Things. So, what is your vision for India and diplomacy when we think about diplomacy in India and foreign relations, and the place we are at right now when we think about all the geopolitical unrest that we are currently experiencing globally?
Well, I think it's a very challenging time for young diplomats. It's a very exciting time for young diplomats because it's like when you have crises mushrooming around the world, you have much more work to do. And that gives you opportunities in many ways. It brings up challenges which you may not have if everything was calm. And so today you have the emergence of geopolitical rivalries, you have several conflict situations, and you have the ship of India, which you have to navigate through all these crises with the ultimate objective of bringing development to our own people. I mean, that's the purpose of our foreign policy, is to how do we ultimately take India and raise it to the next level. So I think fortunately we are at the present in what I call a geopolitical sweet spot. We are a country which is on the rise. We are a country with a very strong emerging economy. It's the fastest growing emerging economy that you have. You have a great demography. You're a relatively young country with the median age of being 27 or 28. And you have the possibility of, taking a geopolitical advantage of all these crises that are happening to strengthen your own economy, to build your own future, to develop our manpower, and our technically qualified manpower is a great asset for the world. Right. So whether you see our demography or you see our economy, or you even take our geography, given in this geopolitical mayhem that is going around, I think it's a ripe time for Indian diplomats to be out there in front. So I think it's a good space to be in.
Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing some very insightful things across, various areas.
Thank you.
It was lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you so much.